project, I thought it would be interesting to study agriculture in space, both how it's been done in the past, how they're currently doing it now, and what they're planning on to do in future space missions. There are many reasons why it is important that astronauts can grow plants in outer space. Firstly, payload is a very important metric when calculating anything having to do with a space mission, and reducing weight by being able to grow your own food in space would save a lot of weight in terms of what they can bring with them. Modern launch systems for low Earth orbit has a cost per kilo of about $2,720 to just launch 1 kilogram of supplies into space. Also, if there's a need for sustainable colonies on Mars or other celestial bodies, it's very essential that they can grow their own food and be somewhat self-sufficient as much as possible. And a single Mars mission would last 4.5 years, so they would want the food security of having food for each person on the crew for a full 5 years, and that comes out to about 1.5 kilograms of food per person per day. So that really takes up a large amount of weight for the duration of the space flight. And redundancy for missions. In spaceflight, they want all systems to have a backup in case something goes wrong with their primary system. So being able to grow your own food if something happens with your existing supplies would be very important, as we saw in the movie The Martian. And also vitamin reduction over time. The supplies that they bring with them will sort of lose their vitamin content over time, a period as long as 5 years. So being able to supplant their nutrition by growing their own food would help the astronauts. There's some issues that are presented when trying to farm in space. Very hostile environment. Firstly, there's reduced gravity. For low Earth orbit, like in the ISS, there's no gravity at all. And on Mars, it's about 1/3 what it is on Earth. So these plants that have had the exact same gravitational conditions to grow throughout their evolution and existence are now faced with growing in something completely different. So we need to learn how their structure is changed by growing in microgravity. And also there's just low levels of light in space, so they need to overcome that by producing their own light source. There's also a constraint on materials, because every kilogram of supplies that you need to sustain the life of your crops is just something extra that you need to bring with you in the first place. And also reliance on agriculture if your system fails. So if you're relying on what you grow to feed your astronauts for part of the mission, and your system fails somehow, then you might not have the necessary calories to sustain the crew for the entire mission. And also there's higher levels of radiation in outer Earth orbit once they get beyond Earth's magnetic field. And this is not something we know very much about because we've only sent people beyond Earth orbit on the lunar missions, and we just don't know that much about how it affects our systems and the systems of the planets. Also, Mars soils does not have any fixed nitrogen within it, so we can overcome this by artificial fertilization, as we discovered a long time ago, or we can use a system that fixates nitrogen more naturally. The first system that's been used to study plant growth in space is called the Vegetable Production System, otherwise known as the VEGGIE. And we grow up to 6 plants on the ISS. It's used to experiment to evaluate how plants grow in microgravity. Its main goal is to just see in orbit with no gravity how the plants respond to growing. It's a luggage-sized system, and it grows the plant in a little packet of clay, fertilizer, and other nutrients. It's called the pillow, and the pillow is basically supposed to recreate optimal soil conditions for the plants that they're growing in terms of nutrition, aeration, and water spreading. And the pillow uses magenta, or the system uses magenta LED lights as a light source. It takes a lot of energy, but it does provide optimal conditions for the plants to grow. And has psychological benefits for the astronauts. Up there, it's a very sterile environment, so having something green and growing is very good for the astronauts' mood and just overall happiness up in space. And it's also very nice for them to get a source of fresh food during long missions. If you're up there for a 5-year Mars mission, eating nothing but processed packaged astronaut food would definitely have an effect. With the veggie, they've grown 2 types of lettuce, kale, cabbage, mustard, and zinnia flowers. And they had an unexplained fungus infection that was removed by astronaut Scott Kelly. He just was able to remove it physically, but it is definitely a concern for NASA scientists in the future of if they see another fungal infection that could potentially wipe out the whole crop. And here's a picture of the veggie. You can see the magenta LED lights that provide the optimal lighting that those plants need, and it's easy access for the astronauts to reach into it. You can see how contained and packed in the system is. And the next system that has been tested on the ISS is the Advanced Plant Habitat. Now, unlike the veggie, it's fully enclosed and automated, meaning the astronauts do not physically work on the plants themselves. So this has many benefits. It really reduces the workload for the astronauts themselves. And it's fully automated with 180 sensors and cameras that closely monitor the conditions of the soil and plants and can provide fixes for if there's anything out of balance automatically. It has a wider range of light conditions. It doesn't just do magenta light. It can use a bunch of different light wavelengths depending on the need of the plant. It was first tested in spring 2018 using Failpress and dwarf wheat. And what scientists of NASA want to do in the future is to study the plant lignin in microgravity. So plant lignin is a compound within the plants that has a lot to do with their like strength of growth. I guess the most analogous thing for humans would be our bones. So they want to see how this compound is affected by the conditions of microgravity. And here we have a time lapse of the growth of dwarf wheat. As you can see, this system is very compact and self-contained and can be harvested relatively easily. And future of space agriculture, what they're planning on studying and developing for future missions. They want to test the growth of fungus and other microorganisms in like petri dishes, so that they can study how what outbreaks might grow in space and could potentially affect the planet systems. And they want to use gene expression to test vegetables, the veggie plant's reaction to various threats. They're going to use gene suppression, which basically allows them to simulate a certain threat to a plant, like not enough of a certain nutrient or potential fungal infection, and they want to see how the plants would respond to that. And since they're doing it artificially, they don't harm the plant and can repeat their experiments. And they need to develop a system and eventually test a system that would work for a very long Mars mission. They need a practical, real-world application that they can use for a 5-year mission that won't break. It will be cost and weight efficient for the trip, and they need to make sure it's not going to break and it's manageable for the astronauts to take care of. And they need to be able to supplant the food supplies with fresh produce to increase launch payload. For every kilogram of food that they can grow for them up in space is 1 less kilogram of food that they need to launch with, and the most energy use is from launch and just getting it into orbit. So anything to grow out there has many weight benefits for any sort of launch. Thank you for listening.